A belligerent state permits itself every such misdeed, every such act of violence, as would disgrace the individual. A certain degree of neurosis is of inestimable value as a drive, especially to a psychologist. A father's death is the most important event, the more heartbreaking and poignant loss in a man's life. A civilization which leaves so large a number of its participants unsatisfied and drives them into revolt neither has nor deserves the prospect of a lasting existence. A piece of creative writing, like a daydream, is a continuation of, and a substitute for, what was once the play of childhood. A fear of weapons is a sign of retarded sexual and emotional maturity. A hero is a man who stands up manfully against his father and in the end victoriously overcomes him. A man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror. A religion, even if it calls itself a religion of love, must be hard and unloving to those who do not belong to it. A strong egoism is a protection. A woman should soften but not weaken a man. All giving is asking, and all asking is an asking for love. All that matters is love and work. America is a mistake, admittedly a gigantic mistake, but a mistake nevertheless. Analogies, it is true, decide nothing, but they can make one feel more at home. Anxiety in children is originally nothing other than an expression of the fact they are feeling the loss of the person they love. Children are completely egoistic. They feel their needs intensely and strive ruthlessly to satisfy them. Civilized people have exchanged some part of their chances of happiness for a measure of security. Civilized society is perpetually menaced with disintegration through this primary hostility of men towards one another. Civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock. Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. Conscience is the internal perception of the rejection of a particular wish operating within us. Crystals reveal their hidden structures only when broken. Dreams are constructed from the residue of yesterday. Dreams are often most profound when they seem the most crazy. Even if all parts of a problem seem to fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, one has to remember that the probable need not necessarily be the truth, and the truth not always probable. Dreams are the guardians of sleep and not its disturbers. Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. Every normal person, in fact, is only normal on the average. His ego approximates to that of the psychotic in some part or other, and to a greater or lesser extent. Everyone owes nature a death. Everywhere I go, I find that a poet has been there before me. Flowers are restful to look at. They have neither emotions nor conflicts. He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. From error to error, one discovers the entire truth. History is just new people making old mistakes. How bold one gets when one is sure of being loved. Humanity is in the highest degree irrational, so that there is no prospect of influencing it by reasonable arguments. Against prejudice one can do nothing. Humor is a means of obtaining pleasure in spite of the distressing effects that interface with it. I became aware of my destiny, to belong to the critical minority as opposed to the unquestioning majority. In the depths of my heart, I can't help being convinced that my dear fellow men, with a few exceptions, are worthless. I cannot face the idea of life without work. What would one do when ideas failed or words refused to come? It is impossible not to shudder at the thought. I cannot think of any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. I have found little good about human beings. In my experience, most of them are trash. I have never doubted that religious phenomena are only to be understood on the pattern of the individual neurotic symptoms familiar to us. I prefer the company of animals more than the company of humans. Certainly, a wild animal is cruel, but to be merciless is the privilege of civilized humans. I've been a fortunate man in life. Nothing has come easily. If the truth of religious doctrines is dependent on an inner experience that bears witness to the truth, what is one to make of the many people who do not have that experience? If you want your wife to listen to you, then talk to another woman. She will be all ears. If you can't do it, give up. If you want to endure life, prepare yourself for death. It is easy to see that the ego is that part of the id which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. In the small matters, trust the mind. In the large ones, the heart. Instinct of love toward an object demands a mastery to obtain it, and if a person feels they can't control the object or feel threatened by it, they act negatively toward it. It is not attention that the child is seeking, but love. Just as no one can be forced into belief, so no one can be forced into unbelief. It might be said of psychoanalysis that if you give it your little finger, it will soon have your whole hand. Knowledge is the intellectual manipulation of carefully verified observations. Most people do not really want freedom, because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Life as we find it is too hard for us. It entails too much pain, too many disappointments, impossible tasks. We cannot do without palliative remedies. Loneliness and darkness have just robbed me of my valuables. Love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. Love is a state of temporary psychosis. Look into the depths of your own soul and learn first to know yourself. Then you will understand why this illness was bound to come upon you, and perhaps you will thenceforth avoid falling ill. Men are strong. So long as they represent a strong idea, they become powerless when they oppose it. Maturity is the ability to postpone gratification. Men are more moral than they think and far more immoral than they can imagine. My way of working was different years ago. I used to wait until an idea came to me. Now I go halfway to meet it, though I don't know whether I find it any the quicker. My love is something valuable to me which I ought not to throw away without reflection. No, our science is no illusion. But an illusion it would be to suppose that what science cannot give us, we can get elsewhere. Only the real, rare, true scientific minds can endure doubt, which is attached to all our knowledge. Not all men are worthy of love. Once again, only religion can answer the question of the purpose of life. One can hardly be wrong in concluding that the idea of life having a purpose stands and falls with the religious system. One day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. One is very crazy when in love. Only a good-for-nothing is not interested in his past. Our fascination with gold is related to the fantasies of early childhood. Out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength. Psychoanalysis is in essence a cure through love. Religion is a universal obsessional neurosis. Poets are masters of use ordinary men, in knowledge of the mind, because they drink at streams which we have not yet made accessible to science. Sexuality is the key to the problem of the psychoneuroses and of the neuroses in general. No one who disdains the key will ever be able to unlock the door. Religion is an illusion, and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. Religion originates in the child's and young mankind's fears and need for help. It cannot be otherwise. The aim of psychoanalysis is to relieve people of their neurotic unhappiness so that they can be normally unhappy. Religious illusion must bow to scientific truth. It is in total error about the nature of the true world. Only science is not an illusion. Talk therapy turns hysterical misery to mundane unhappiness. The behavior of a human being in sexual matters is often a prototype for the whole of his other modes of reaction in life. That which he projects ahead of him as his ideal is merely his substitute for the lost narcissism of his childhood, the time when he was his own ideal. The conscious mind may be compared to a fountain playing in the sun and falling back into the great subterranean pool of subconscious from which it rises. The dream is the liberation of the spirit from the pressure of external nature, a detachment of the soul from the fetters of matter. The ego represents what we call reason and sanity, in contrast to the id which contains the passions. The first human who hurled an insult instead of a stone was the founder of civilization. The ego is not master in its own house. The first requisite of civilization is that of justice. The game replaces sexual enjoyment by pleasure in movement. The inclination to aggression constitutes the greatest impediment to civilization. The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. The great question that has never been answered, and which I haven't yet been able to answer, despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, is, what does a woman want? The Irish are the one race for which psychoanalysis is of no use whatsoever, because they already live in a dream world. The liberty of the individual is no gift of civilization. It was greatest before there was any civilization. The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside. The madman is a dreamer awake. The most complicated achievements of thought are possible without the assistance of consciousness. The only person with whom you have to compare ourselves is that you in the past. And the only person better you should be, this is who you are now. The only shame in masturbation is the shame of not doing it well. The only unnatural sexual behavior is none at all. The paranoid is never entirely mistaken. The poets and philosophers before me discovered the unconscious. What I discovered was the scientific method by which the unconscious can be studied. The price we pay for our advance in civilization is a loss of happiness through the heightening of the sense of guilt. The scope of one's personality is defined by the magnitude of that problem which is capable of driving a person out of his wits. The sexual life of adult women is a dark continent for psychology. The tendency to aggression is an innate, independent, instinctual disposition in man. It constitutes the powerful obstacle to culture. The virtuous man contents himself with dreaming that which the wicked man does in actual life. The voice of reason is small but very persistent. The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing. The whole life of instinct serves the one end of bringing about death. Thinking is an experimental dealing with small quantities of energy, just as a general moves miniature figures over a map before setting his troops in action. There is little that gives children greater pleasure than when a grown-up lets himself down to their level, renounces his oppressive superiority and plays with them as an equal. Those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will soon convince themselves that mortals cannot hide any secret. Time spent with cats is never wasted. To be completely honest with oneself is the very best effort a human being can make. Toward the person who has died, we adopt a special attitude, something like admiration for someone who has accomplished a very difficult task. Two hallmarks of a healthy life are the abilities to love and to work. Each requires imagination. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. We are what we are because we have been what we have been. What we call happiness in the strictest sense comes from the, preferably sudden, satisfaction of needs which have been dammed up to a high degree. What a distressing contrast there is between the radiant intelligence of the child and the feeble mentality of the average adult. We know less about the sexual life of little girls than of boys, but we need not feel ashamed of this distinction. After all, the sexual life of adult women is a dark continent for psychology. We choose not randomly each other. We meet only those who already exist in our subconscious. We may say that hysteria is a caricature of an artistic creation, a compulsion neurosis, a caricature of a religion, and a paranoiac delusion a caricature of a philosophic system. Where does a thought go when it's forgotten? Were we fully to understand the reasons for other people's behavior, it would all make sense. When a man is freed of religion, he has a better chance to live a normal and wholesome life. Whoever loves becomes humble. Those who love have, so to speak, pawned a part of their narcissism. What is common in all these dreams is obvious. They completely satisfy wishes excited during the day which remain unrealized. They are simply and undisguisedly realizations of wishes. What progress we are making. In the Middle Ages they would have burned me. Now they are content with burning my books. When inspiration does not come to me, I go halfway to meet it. When one does not have what one wants, one must want what one has. When someone abuses me, I can defend myself, but against praise I am defenseless. When we attempt to imagine death, we perceive ourselves as spectators. When we share, that is poetry in the prose of life. Where it was, their ego shall be. Where such men love, they have no desire, and where they desire, they cannot love. With words, one man can make another blessed, or drive him to despair. Without love, we fall ill. Words and magic were in the beginning one and the same thing, and even today words retain much of their magical power. Words have a magical power. They can either bring the greatest happiness or the deepest despair. Words were originally magic, and the word retains much of its old magical power even today. Writers write for fame, wealth, power, and the love of women.